He gestured dismissively at her name tag. Eleanor. Eleanor, you pour wine for a living. Give us your 2 cents on hypersonic engine development. His table of vultures roared with laughter, the sound echoing off the crystal and polished mahogany of the exclusive Manhattan steakhouse. Julian Croft, a man whose net worth rivaled the GDP of a small nation, was making sport of the 28-year-old waitress. He was bored, arrogant, and amused by her weary defiance. But Eleanor Vance didn't flinch. She simply paused in her task of clearing their plates, met his gaze with eyes that held the cold, hard clarity of tempered steel, and uttered the 7 words that shattered his billion-dollar world. Your new engine's turbine blades are fake. The laughter died as if strangled. The clatter of a dropped fork seemed deafening in the sudden, crushing silence. Julian Croft, the titan of aerospace, leaned forward, his casual cruelty evaporating into a focused, dangerous intensity. His voice was a low growl that vibrated with menace. "What did you just say to me?" The hushed symphony of wealth, the soft clink of silverware, the murmur of powerful men discussing powerful things, the glug of a $2,000 Bordeaux being poured, was the soundtrack to Eleanor Vance's purgatory. For 4 years, she had navigated the treacherous floors of The Summit, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreetly numbered door and a 6-month waiting list. Here, fortunes were made and lost between the appetizer and the entree. Eleanor was a ghost in this ecosystem, a silent functionary whose existence was only acknowledged when a glass was empty or a plate needed clearing. Her anonymity was her armor, a drab waitress uniform her camouflage. Tonight, the prime table, the corner booth known as the Eagle's Nest, was occupied by the apex predator of this world, Julian Croft. Founder and CEO of Croft Aeronautics, he was a living legend, a man who had single-handedly revolutionized private spaceflight. His face, weathered and sharp as a granite cliff, was a permanent fixture on the covers of Aviation Week and Forbes. He was dining with his sycophantic COO, Robert Sterling, and 2 venture capitalists, the Harrington brothers, who hung on his every word like pilot fish on a great white shark. "The Axiom 9 is a done deal," Croft announced, his voice a confident baritone that cut through the restaurant's polite hum. "The Pentagon signs off next week. Phase 1 of the contract alone will triple our market cap." "A master stroke, Julian." "Truly," Sterling gushed, raising his glass. "Acquiring Thorn Dynamics was the key, their proprietary alloy for the turbine blades. It's a decade ahead of anything else on the market." "Thorn," one of the Harrington brothers sneered with the easy contempt of inherited wealth. "Marcus Thorn is a snake oil salesman, but even a blind pig finds a truffle once in a while. I heard he was desperate to sell. Probably needed the capital to cover his losses in the Asian markets." A spike of ice pierced the dull ache in Eleanor's soul at the mention of that name. Marcus Thorn. She felt the heavy tray of water glasses tremble in her grip and willed her hand to be still. "Breathe, Ellie. Just breathe. You're invisible. He's not here. That world is gone." She had built a fortress around that name, brick by painful brick, for 4 long years. She approached the table, her movements practiced and fluid. "More water, Mr. Croft?" she asked, her voice a neutral professional murmur. Sterling, flushed with wine and self-importance, barely glanced at her. He saw the uniform, not the woman. A cruel, boyish idea flickered in his eyes as he looked from Eleanor to his boss. "You know, Julian," he said, his voice loud enough to be an announcement. "You're always talking about the importance of the layman's perspective. How your technology has to be understood on a fundamental level to be truly great." Croft, sensing a performance, leaned back and steepled his fingers, a small, indulgent smile playing on his lips. "I have been known to say that, Robert. What's your point?" "My point," Sterling declared, waving a dismissive hand in Eleanor's direction, "is that you should ask her. She's the layman. She deals in steak temperatures and wine pairings. Ask her what she thinks of the Axiom 9 hypersonic engine project." The Harrington brothers exchanged smirks, anticipating the sport. Julian Croft, a man who advised presidents and generals, saw the appeal of the absurd theatre. He was a predator, and he was toying with his food before the main course arrived. He let his gaze drift to her name tag, a small plastic rectangle that read, Eleanor. She froze, her back to him, the water pitcher clutched in her hand. She just wanted to fill the glasses and melt back into the shadows. "My COO has a point," Croft boomed, projecting his voice for the benefit of his audience. "We are on the verge of signing the largest defense contract of the decade, a deal built on the most advanced material science on Earth. But we've overlooked a key demographic, the people who refill the bread baskets." The table erupted in a wave of condescending laughter. Eleanor turned slowly, her face a carefully constructed mask of polite neutrality. Inside, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw their $1,000 suits, their smug, entitled faces, and the casual cruelty in their eyes. She saw the very world that had cast her out and left her for dead. The script for this moment was simple. She was supposed to stammer an apology, say, "I'm sorry, sir, I wouldn't know anything about that," and then scurry away, mortified, providing them with an amusing anecdote for their ride home in the Bentley. But they had said the name. Marcus Thorne. And they had talked about his proprietary alloy. She set the heavy water pitcher down with a soft, deliberate thud. She didn't look at Julian Croft. She looked past him, at the schematics he'd carelessly left visible on his tablet screen, a 3D rendering of the Axiom 9's core. Her eyes, which had been dull with exhaustion moments before, suddenly sharpened with an unnerving, laser-like focus. "So, Eleanor," Croft said, the smirk practically dripping from his voice, "you pour wine for a living. Give us your 2 cents on hypersonic engine development." She met his gaze. The mask was gone. The ghost was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone they could not possibly comprehend. "Your new engine's turbine blades are fake," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the restaurant's ambience like a diamond blade through glass. The laughter stopped. Sterling, mid-chuckle, seemed to choke on his own amusement. Croft's smirk didn't just vanish. It imploded, leaving his face a mask of stone. He sat bolt upright, his posture transforming in a millisecond from that of a relaxed lion to a coiled serpent. "What did you just say to me?" he growled. Eleanor's gaze flickered to the tablet. "I said," she repeated, her voice steady and clear, "the blades are fake. You think you're buying a revolutionary cobalt titanium superalloy from Thorne Dynamics. You're not. You're buying cleverly coated ceramic composites with a forged certificate of material analysis. They'll pass all pre-flight stress tests. They'll even withstand the initial static fire trials." She finally looked directly into his eyes, and what he saw there made the blood in his veins run cold. It was not anger. It was certainty. But the moment the Axiom 9 hits Mach 3, the thermal expansion differential will cause microfractures. At Mach 4, the blades will disintegrate. The failure won't just destroy the engine, it will trigger a catastrophic, uncontained explosion of the entire aircraft. You're not buying a breakthrough, Mr. Croft. You're buying a $10 billion coffin. The silence in the eagle's nest was absolute. It was so profound that it seemed to have its own gravity, pulling the attention of nearby tables. Sterling's face was a mess of confusion and outrage. "This is insane! Who is this woman? Julian, she's crazy!" Croft ignored him, his eyes locked on Eleanor. His mind, a finely tuned machine for calculating risk and opportunity, was spinning. The technical specificity, the calm assurance. It was impossible. "How?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "How could you possibly know that?" "Marcus Thorne isn't a blind pig who stumbled on a truffle," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength, as if a long-dormant power was surging back to life. "He's a scavenger who steals the work of dead men. The alloy you think you bought was developed by my father, Dr. Alistair Vance. It was called Vance Sea-Tie, and its formula was lost 16 years ago in the lab fire that killed him." Croft's face went white. Alistair Vance. The name was legendary, a genius in metallurgy, a visionary who had died tragically young, his greatest work supposedly lost with him. "Thorne was my father's junior partner," Eleanor said, the words coming out like chips of ice. "He was there the night of the fire. He claimed the research was destroyed. He lied. He spent the last 16 years trying to replicate it, but he could never stabilize the crystalline matrix. What he's selling you is his latest, most convincing failure. He's not selling you an asset. He's selling you his debt, his failures, and his fraud, all wrapped up in a company that will be worthless the moment your engine explodes on a military test range." The Harrington brothers looked as if they'd seen a ghost. Sterling was sputtering, trying to form a coherent sentence. Julian Croft just stared at the waitress. The joke was over. He was standing on the edge of a precipice, and this woman in a cheap black uniform was the only thing holding him back. He fumbled in his jacket, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. He pulled out his wallet and threw a black, featureless titanium card onto the table. "Robert, pay the bill. All of it. Tip extravagantly." He turned to the Harrington brothers. "The meeting is over." "Julian, what the hell is going on?" one of them stammered. "Get out!" Croft roared, the sound snapping through the restaurant like a shockwave. The three men, accustomed to obeying his commands without question, scrambled from the booth, their faces a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Julian Croft turned back to Eleanor, who hadn't moved. She stood there, a lone, still figure in the wreckage of his evening. "You," he said, his voice now dangerously low and controlled. "My car is waiting at the service entrance. You have 5 seconds to decide if you are getting in it. If you choose not to, I will buy this restaurant by sunrise just to get your employment records. I will find you. Now, who in the hell are you?" Eleanor reached behind her back and untied the strings of her apron. She folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "My name," she said, her voice finally shedding the last vestiges of the waitress, "is Eleanor Vance, and Marcus Thorne didn't just steal from my father. He's the man who lit the match." The back of the Maybach was a silent, leather-lined tomb hurtling through the rain-slicked canyons of Manhattan. Eleanor stared out the window, watching her own ghostly reflection slide across the neon-streaked cityscape. The polyester of her uniform felt coarse and alien against her skin, a costume from a life that had ended an hour ago. Beside her, Julian Croft sat in rigid silence, not looking at her. He was on his phone, the screen's glow illuminating the grim set of his jaw as he fired off a fusillade of encrypted messages. They swept past the glittering facade of the Croft Aeronautics Tower, a 100-story monument of glass and steel that scraped the clouds and descended into a private underground entrance. The elevator, accessed by Croft's thumbprint, ascended in unnerving silence, not to the executive offices, but to a penthouse apartment that occupied the entire top floor. "System, lockdown," Croft commanded, as the doors hissed shut behind them. Steel shutters slid down over the panoramic windows with a quiet finality, sealing them in. Lights. 50%. The vast minimalist space was plunged into a soft twilight. Croft rounded on her, his eyes blazing with a desperate, focused intensity. Eleanor Vance, Alistair Vance's daughter. The official record says you died in a car accident in Europe 10 years ago. A sailing scholarship then. Nothing. The record was falsified, Eleanor said, her voice flat. After my father died, Marcus Thorne became my legal guardian. He controlled the estate. When I turned 18 and started asking questions about the fire, about my father's research, it became convenient for me to disappear. He paid the right people. A boating accident. Tragic. I was given a new identity and a one-way ticket. And you just accepted it? Croft's voice was laced with disbelief. You let him take everything? I was 18, Mr. Croft. I was terrified, she said, walking past him towards the darkened windows. She could feel the city's pulse even through the steel and glass. I had no money, no one to turn to. He had an army of lawyers and all of my father's connections. Who would have believed me? The orphaned girl, hysterical with grief, or the charming, successful Marcus Thorne, who so generously took her in? She turned back to face him. So I ran. I became a nobody. I worked menial jobs across Europe, then here. I learned to be invisible. I've spent the last 10 years hiding, listening, and learning. I read every technical journal, every industry report, every patent filing. I taught myself computational fluid dynamics and material science from stolen library books and online courses paid for with tip money. I have been waiting for him to make a mistake, for his greed to finally outweigh his caution. And the Axiom 9 is that mistake, Croft stated, his mind piecing it together. It's his masterpiece of fraud, she confirmed. The ceramic composite blades are a marvel of deception. He's using a proprietary diamond-like carbon coating that mimics the thermal and spectroscopic signature of my father's alloy. Your initial, non-destructive tests will all come back clean. You have to be looking for the structural lies, not the material ones. My due diligence team is the best in the world, Croft shot back, pacing like a caged wolf. They've been over Thorne Dynamics for 6 months. They've seen the metallurgical reports, the stress test data. They saw the data Thorne wanted them to see, Eleanor countered, her voice sharp with authority. Did they do a phase contrast X-ray analysis of the blade's internal crystalline structure? Did they run a resonant frequency test to failure? Or did they just accept the forged paperwork from the German lab that Thorne secretly owns through a shell corporation in Liechtenstein? Croft stopped pacing. He stared at her, the blood draining from his face. He knew the answer. His team hadn't gone that deep. No one would have. It was a level of paranoia reserved for Cold War espionage, not corporate acquisitions. He's using my father's own unpublished theories on resonance dampening to mask the composite's inherent weaknesses, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. He's using my father's genius to sell a lie that will get people killed. He's so arrogant, so sure that no one is left who would even know what to look for. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Croft walked to a sleek black bar and poured 2 glasses of ice water, his hands surprisingly steady. He handed one to her. "Why me, Eleanor?" he asked, his tone softer now, genuinely curious. "Why tell me? Why break a decade of silence tonight, in a restaurant, in the most public way possible?" "Because he's using your company as the stage," she said, her voice trembling with a sudden, raw fury she had suppressed for years. A Croft Aeronautics engine on a U.S. military test flight, The failure would be spectacular, public. It wouldn't just be a corporate disaster. It would be a national security scandal. The investigations would take years. By the time they traced the fraud back to Thorne, he would have already moved his money and disappeared, leaving you and your company in ruins. And the Vance name, what little is left of it, would be forever linked to the biggest disaster in modern aerospace history. She took a steadying breath. He's not just trying to cash out. He's trying to salt the earth of my father's legacy. Tonight, when I saw the schematics on your tablet, I knew I was out of time. This was my only chance. Julian Croft sat down heavily in a dark leather chair. He looked at this woman, this ghost from the past, who had emerged from the shadows, clad in a waitress uniform, to save him from his own hubris. He saw the years of fear and solitude etched around her eyes, but underneath it, he saw the unyielding strength of her father's steel. "This information," he said slowly, "if it's true, it doesn't just save my company, it exposes him. You're not doing this for me. You're doing this for revenge." "He took my life, Mr. Croft," she said quietly. "Call it whatever you want." "All right, Eleanor Vance," Croft said, standing up, the decision made. The Titan was back, energized by the prospect of war. "You want to reclaim your father's legacy? You're about to get your shot. I have a secure R&D facility on the 65th floor. We call it the Skunk Works. My top engineers are there right now, running final simulations on the Axiom 9 integration." He walked to the elevator and keyed in a code, his thumbprint glowing green. "But they're my people. They trust my COO, Robert Sterling, the man who personally vetted this deal. They believe Thorne's data is gold. They will see you as a threat, a lunatic waitress with a conspiracy theory. Sterling is either a fool or he's on Thorne's payroll," Eleanor said flatly. Croft's eyes narrowed. "If you're right, I'm surrounded by enemies within my own walls. If you're wrong, you've just destroyed my relationship with my entire executive team and pointed a loaded gun at the most important deal of my life. You'll be taking on not just Marcus Thorne, but the institutional inertia of my entire company." Eleanor walked into the elevator, leaving her water glass behind. "For 10 years, I've been fighting this war with nothing but a library card and a Wi-Fi connection. Give me access to your raw sensor data. Give me one of your labs. Give me 6 hours. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, cold and sharp. "I won't just prove the blades are fake. I'll show you my father's signature." Croft hit the button for the 65th floor. The doors slid shut. "You don't have 6 hours, Miss Vance," he said, his voice grim. "The Pentagon pre-briefing is tomorrow at noon. You have until dawn." He met her gaze in the mirrored wall of the elevator. "Welcome back to the world." The 65th floor was another world entirely. Known as the Skunk Works, it was a high-security cathedral of innovation, a sprawling, sterile white space filled with holographic displays, quantum computers humming behind glass walls, and the quiet intensity of 24 of the world's most brilliant aerospace engineers. The air itself seemed to crackle with intelligence. When the private elevator opened and Julian Croft emerged at 2 a.m. with a woman in a waitress uniform, the entire floor fell into a stunned silence. Workstations went dark as screensavers kicked in. All eyes turned to them. Robert Sterling, the COO, was there, huddled with the lead engineer, a respected veteran named Dr. Oris Thorne. When he saw Eleanor, his face went from shock to pure, undisguised fury. "Julian, what is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded, striding towards them. "You can't possibly be bringing her down here. This is a secure facility. Everyone, listen up." Croft's voice boomed, cutting through the tension. "This is Eleanor Vance. For the next 8 hours, She is in charge of the Axiom 9 blade integrity analysis. She has my complete and unconditional authority. Give her anything she asks for. Dr. Thorne, give her your primary console." Dr. Thorne, a man with 4 decades of experience and a healthy professional ego, stared in disbelief. "Mr. Croft, with all due respect, that's absurd. We are running final diagnostic checks. We can't just hand over the primary console to a civilian." "She's not a civilian," Croft said, his eyes daring anyone to challenge him. "She's a consultant." "A consultant on what? Wine pairings?" Sterling sneered. The jab fell flat in the tense atmosphere. Eleanor ignored them both. She walked past the gawking engineers directly to the main console, a massive wraparound desk with a dozen interconnected monitors displaying telemetry, metallurgical data, and airflow simulations. "I don't need your console, Doctor," she said, her voice calm and authoritative. "Just grant me root access to the raw data stream from the last static fire test and the latest batch of metallurgical scans." "Guest access won't get you into the encrypted sensor logs," Thorne said stiffly, a smug certainty in his voice. "That requires level 5 clearance." "It will," Eleanor replied, her fingers already a blur across a secondary keyboard. "If you're still running the outdated Cerberus 3.4 security protocol, which has a known kernel exploit in its guest partition." Before the stunned engineer could react, she had bypassed his security, and the main screen flickered, displaying the raw, unfiltered data she had requested. A collective gasp went through the room. "Lock down this station," Eleanor commanded, not looking up. "No one sees my screen but Mr. Croft, and get me the unredacted materials manifest for Blade Batch 7B. I want to see the isotopic sourcing for the cobalt." For the next several hours, Eleanor worked with a ferocious, single-minded intensity that was terrifying to behold. She wasn't just an analyst, she was a virtuoso. She moved through their complex systems as if she had designed them, cross-referencing terabytes of data, her eyes spotting infinitesimal anomalies that the entire team had missed. She wasn't just looking at the numbers, she was reading the story they told. Croft watched from a glass-walled office overlooking the floor. He saw Sterling in a furious, whispered argument with Dr. Thorne. He saw the suspicion and hostility on the faces of his own team. He had staked his reputation, his entire company, on the word of a woman he'd met 3 hours ago. Inside the console's datasphere, Eleanor was hunting. She found it, buried deep in the noise of the sensor logs, a thermal signature anomaly during the static fire test. A minute, almost imperceptible temperature spike on the leading edge of a single turbine blade, a spike that vanished in less than a nanosecond. To Croft's team, it was a sensor ghost, a statistical outlier. To Eleanor, it was everything. "It's not a ghost," she whispered. "It's an echo." She isolated the data point and began building a complex simulation around it, modeling the thermodynamic stresses the blade would face at hypersonic speeds. She was pushing the virtual engine far beyond the parameters of the official tests. Dr. Thorne, his professional pride wounded, approached her station, flanked by Sterling. "What exactly are you looking for, Ms. Vance? My team has already certified this data. The blades are perfect." "Your team certified the data Thorne gave you," Eleanor said, without looking up from her simulation. "I'm looking for the data the blade gave me." She pointed to the tiny spike on the graph. "This. You dismissed it as noise." "It is noise," Thorne insisted. "A sensor malfunction. It's statistically irrelevant." "In a homogeneous alloy, yes," Eleanor agreed. "But in a coated composite, a flaw in the bond between the substrate and the coating would create exactly this kind of thermal ghost under stress. A tiny pocket of gas, a microscopic imperfection, heating and cooling at a different rate." "That's conjecture," Sterling spat. "You have no proof." "Then let's get some," Eleanor said. She looked up at Croft, who had emerged from his office. "Mr. Croft, I need one of the blades from batch 7B, and I need a resonant frequency scanner." Dr. Thorne paled. "That's a destructive test. We can't just destroy a multi-million-dollar blade based on a wild theory." "Get her the blade," Croft commanded. Two technicians, looking deeply uncomfortable, returned minutes later with a single, exquisitely crafted turbine blade. It was a work of art, gleaming with an otherworldly luster. Eleanor ran her fingers over its surface, a strange, sad expression on her face. "He got the finish right," she murmured. "It almost looks like my father's work." She placed the blade in the resonant scanner's cradle. "Every object has a unique resonant frequency, a frequency at which it will vibrate most intensely," she explained to the silent room. "A solid, perfectly structured alloy will have a single, clean, resonant peak, but a composite, two different materials bonded together, will have two or more. It will have tells." She started the scan. A graph began to form on the main screen, plotting frequency against amplitude. A single, sharp peak began to rise, just as Dr. Thorne's data predicted. He allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. Sterling crossed his arms, looking vindicated. "See?" Thorne said. "Perfectly homogeneous." Eleanor didn't answer. She just increased the scanner's sensitivity, pushing it into the sub-harmonic range. "Keep watching." And then it appeared. Far down the frequency spectrum, almost lost in the machine's own noise floor, a second, much smaller peak flickered into existence. It was a faint, spectral image on the graph, but it was undeniably there. It was the echo of the ceramic core, vibrating at its own distinct frequency. It was the signature of the lie. A stunned silence fell over the skunk works. Dr. Thorne stared at the screen, his face ashen, the work of his entire team collapsing before his eyes. Sterling looked like he was going to be physically ill. "My God," Thorne whispered. "It's a composite." Before anyone could process the revelation, a new voice, slick and amused, echoed from the elevator bay. "Well, well. Pulling an all-nighter, Julian. I thought you'd be getting your beauty rest before our big day." Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She spun around. Standing there, flanked by his own security detail, was Marcus Thorne. He was smiling, a picture of charisma and success, but his eyes, cold and reptilian, were locked on her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a silken purr of malice. "I thought you were dead. Imagine my surprise, still meddling in things you don't understand, I see." He turned his predatory smile on Croft. "Julian, my friend, a last-minute case of the jitters? I came to deliver the final hard copies of the patents myself, but it seems you've found my long-lost, deeply troubled ward. How on earth did you dig her up?" The atmosphere on the 65th floor, already tense, became instantly suffocating. Marcus Thorne strode into the skunk works as if he owned the place, his movements smooth and confident. He radiated an aura of untouchable power. "Thorne," Croft's voice was a low growl, "your timing is impeccable. You're just in time to see your fraud fall apart." Thorne let out a hearty laugh, a performance for the assembled engineers. "Fraud? Julian, you wound me. You're listening to the delusions of a disturbed young woman, a woman with a documented history of emotional instability after her father's tragic death. It's all in the court records." Very sad. He looked at Eleanor with mock pity. "Ellie, you shouldn't be here. You need help." "The blade, Marcus," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the hammer in her chest. "The blade doesn't lie." "Ah, yes, the blade," Thorne said, walking over to the console. He glanced at the dual-peak resonance scan on the screen, and for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, not fear but annoyance, crossed his face. He recovered instantly. A sensor glitch? An anomaly? Julian, your team, Dr. Thorne's team, has validated every piece of data. Are you really going to throw away the future of your company based on a spectral ghost on a screen, championed by a woman who, I must remind you, is legally deceased? He had them. Eleanor could feel it. He was turning her proof into an ambiguity, a technicality. It was her word, the word of a ghost, against the entire documented history of the deal. Robert Sterling, seeing his chance, seized it. "He's right, Julian," he interjected, his voice pleading. "This is a fluke. We can't risk blowing up the deal with the Pentagon hours away. This woman is a known. She has a history. Thorne is our partner." Thorne smiled. "Precisely, Robert. We are partners, and our partnership is about to make us all very, very rich. Don't let this unfortunate family drama cloud your judgment." He was a master manipulator, playing on their greed, their fear, their professional pride. He was isolating Eleanor, painting her as the single point of failure, the hysteric in the room. Croft looked from Thorne's confident smirk to Eleanor's pale, determined face. He was at a crossroads. "He's right," Eleanor said quietly. Croft stared at her, his expression a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Had she just folded? "The resonance scan. It's just an indicator," she continued, her voice gaining a strange, academic calm. "It's not definitive proof. A court could argue it's a machine error. A lawyer could bury it in expert testimony for years." Thorne's smile widened. He had won. "See, Julian? Even she admits it. Now let's have security escort Ms. Vance out, and we can get back to business." "But," Eleanor said, her voice dropping, and she held up a single finger, "my father was a very, very careful man. He was paranoid. He never trusted digital data alone." She turned to Dr. Thorne, whose face was a study in confusion. "Doctor, you worked at MIT in the early 2000s. You must have known my father." "Alistair Vance?" "Of course," Thorne stammered. "He was a genius, a legend." "Did you know about his obsession with watermarks?" Eleanor asked. Thorne's brow furrowed. "Watermarks?" "Not for paper," Eleanor said, a cold, slow smile spreading across her face. "For his alloys. He never trusted a formula. He built a signature into the metal itself, a physical, undeniable watermark at the molecular level." She turned her gaze back to Marcus Thorne, whose confident smile was beginning to look strained. "He developed a method for introducing a trace isotope of a rare earth element, lutetium-176, into his alloys during the smelting process. It's inert, it has no effect on the material's properties, but it's his signature. It's present in every single authentic piece of metal he ever created." She walked back to the console. "Your team ran a standard spectrographic analysis. You were looking for cobalt, titanium, molybdenum. You weren't looking for lutetium, because why would you? No one even knew it was supposed to be there." She typed a few commands. "I'm rerunning the raw spectrograph data, but this time I'm filtering for the gamma-ray emission spike unique to lutetium-176. A new graph appeared on the screen. It was a flat line. "There," Thorne said, his voice a little too loud. "Nothing. Satisfied?" "Oh, I'm not done," Eleanor said. She pulled a small, worn, leather-bound journal from a hidden pocket inside her uniform jacket. It was her father's lab journal, the one thing she had managed to save from the fire. She opened it to a page filled with handwritten equations. My father knew that lutetium could be shielded. He predicted that a sufficiently advanced coating, like your diamond carbon layer, might mask the signature from a standard surface scan. She looked at Marcus. You were his partner. You must have known about the lutetium, so you designed the coating to hide it. A clever move. The color was draining from Thorne's face. He was no longer smiling. But my father, she said, tapping a complex equation in the journal, also developed a failsafe. He knew that under extreme thermal stress, the lutetium isotope would shed a specific, unique pattern of beta particles, a pattern your coating can't block. She turned back to the console. Now, I'm going to cross-reference the spectrograph data with the thermal imaging logs from the static fire test. Specifically, and her eyes bored into Thorne's, I'm going to look at that one, single statistically irrelevant nanosecond where the blade temperature spiked. I'm looking for my father's ghost. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The system began processing. The room was so quiet, the hum of the servers sounded like a roar. On the screen, 2 sets of data scrolled past, merging, correlating. And then, a single point of light appeared. A perfect match, a beta particle decay pattern that could only mean one thing. The signature was there, but it wasn't the blade. Eleanor stared at the screen, a look of dawning, terrible understanding on her face. "Oh, Marcus," she whispered, her voice filled with a kind of horrified awe. "You brilliant, monstrous man." She looked up at the stunned faces in the room. "The lutetium signature, it's not in the blade, it's in the test bed, in the clamps holding the blade." She turned to face Thorne, who was now as pale as a corpse. "You didn't just fake the blades," she said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "You faked the tests themselves. You took a piece of my father's original, authentic alloy, a piece you must have kept from the fire as a souvenir, and you machined it into the testbed clamps. When the static fire heated the whole assembly, the clamps emitted the lutetium signature. Your sensors picked it up and attributed it to the blade. You didn't just hide the evidence. You used my father's own signature to certify your forgery." The confession was complete. It was a perfect, closed loop of fraud, so audacious, so diabolical, that no one would have ever thought to look for it. Robert Sterling collapsed into a nearby chair as if his legs had given out. Dr. Thorne looked at Marcus Thorne with an expression of pure, unadulterated. A silence descended upon the 65th floor, a vacuum so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. It was the silence of collapsed realities, of paradigms shattered beyond repair. The hum of the quantum servers, once a sound of progress, now sounded like a funeral dirge. Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose entire professional life was built on the bedrock of empirical data, stared at the damning graph on the screen as if it were a gorgon, turning his certainties to stone. He took a staggering half-step back, his face a mask of horrified comprehension. "The clamps," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. He used the signature as a broadcast beacon to legitimize a lie. My God, it's a perversion of the scientific method itself. Marcus Thorne didn't lunge. He didn't roar. The animalistic fury of a cornered beast was too simple a reaction for a man of his intricate malice. Instead, a strange, terrifying calm settled over him. His posture, which had been tight with tension, suddenly relaxed. He straightened his Savile Row suit jacket and let out a soft, rattling chuckle that was infinitely more chilling than any scream. "Brilliant," he breathed, his reptilian eyes fixed on Eleanor. He wasn't looking at a woman. He was looking at a masterpiece of destruction, an elegant proof he could not refute. Truly, utterly brilliant. I always knew Alistair's greatest creation wasn't some lump of metal. It was you. He turned his gaze to the assembled engineers, his expression one of a disappointed teacher addressing a class of failures. Do you see? For 16 years I have worked. I have built an empire on the dregs of a dead man's genius, trying to will into existence something he simply dreamt. And none of you, not one of you, with your billion-dollar machines and your pedigreed educations, could ever see the flaw in the forgery. Because you lack the singular vital ingredient. He took a step towards Eleanor, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that filled the vast, silent room. You lack his ghost. She has it. The obsession. The maddening inability to accept a simple, profitable lie for what it is. He was the same. He would spend a month chasing a decimal point, ruin a multi-million-dollar project over a statistical anomaly only he could perceive. Unreasonable. Unprofitable. Perfect. The confession hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was not an apology. It was a boast. He was admitting his fraud as a testament to its own perfection, his only flaw being an inability to account for the ghost in his machine. Alistair Vance's daughter. Security. Julian Croft's voice was like the snap of a glacier calving. It was cold, final, and absolute. The two guards moved forward, their presence suddenly immense. Robert Sterling, seeing his world evaporate, finally broke. "Julian, I swear to you, I had no idea," he whimpered, scrambling towards his boss. "I vetted him, yes, but the data was perfect. He fooled everyone. This is on him, all of him." Croft didn't even honor Sterling with a glance. His eyes were locked on Marcus Thorne. "Robert," he said, his voice flat and devoid of heat, "your incompetence and your sycophancy have been a tolerable, if irritating cost of doing business for years. But you brought this plague into my house. You championed him. You sat at my table and toasted his success. You are not a victim of his fraud. You were his most useful tool. Pack your desk. A courier will deliver the severance paperwork to your home. If I ever see your face on my property again, I will have you removed as a trespasser." Sterling froze, his mouth agape, the words of a powerful man stripping him of his identity more effectively than any physical blow. He crumpled, a hollowed-out suit, and stumbled towards the elevator in a daze, his career over in the space of a single sentence. Marcus Thorne simply smiled as the guards flanked him. "You think this is a victory, Julian?" he sneered. "You just lost the largest defense contract in a decade. Your company's timeline is in shambles. Your stock will plummet. You may have found the cancer, but you're still bleeding on the table." He then turned his full attention to Eleanor, his eyes burning with a venomous, intimate hatred. "And you, little ghost, what now? You've avenged your sainted father. You've performed your one great trick. But the war is over. The silence you've craved is coming. I wonder how long it will take before you realize that the monster you were hunting was the only thing giving your pathetic, invisible life a purpose. Enjoy the quiet." He offered no resistance as the guards led him away. His final words were not a threat, but a curse, designed to poison the very victory she had just secured. As the elevator doors hissed shut, sealing him away, Eleanor felt a tremor run through her, a deep, cellular vibration. The adrenaline that had sustained her for hours, for years, began to recede, and in its place was not triumph, but a vast, terrifying emptiness. The fight was over. The equation was solved. She looked down at her father's journal, its worn leather cool against her trembling fingers, and felt 16 years of solitude crash down on her at once. The dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. On the 65th floor, the Skunk Works was a field hospital after a battle. Engineers moved about in a state of shell shock, speaking in hushed tones, dismantling the apparatus of their own failure. Dr. Aris Thorne was personally overseeing the quarantine of every piece of data, every physical component that had come from Thorne Dynamics, his face etched with the grim determination of a man purging a heresy. Eleanor sat alone at the primary console, the war room from which she had won her war. She had not moved in over an hour. The world outside the armored windows was waking up, but her world had come to a complete stop. Marcus Thorne's parting words echoed in the silence of her mind. What now? The hiss of the elevator door made her look up. Julian Croft emerged, having shed his suit jacket. He carried two things, a tablet and a simple plain white ceramic mug steaming with black coffee. He placed the mug on the console beside her hand without a word. The gesture was so mundane, so human, it felt jarring in the high-tech sanctuary. He stood beside her, looking out at the rising sun. My legal team has already filed for emergency injunctions against all of Thorne's assets, citing corporate fraud and national security risks. The SEC and the Department of Justice were notified 45 minutes ago. By noon, his name will be radioactive on a global scale. He paused, then turned to her. This is the part where you tell me what you want. Eleanor stared into the black coffee. He's right, she whispered, her voice hoarse. The Axiom 9 is dead. The contract is gone. You're ruined. Don't mistake a crisis for a ruin, Miss Vance, Croft said, his tone sharp as flint. A crisis is an opportunity to purge weakness. Thorne was a weakness. Sterling was a weakness. My team's complacency was a weakness. I have excised them. What remains will be stronger. He swiped a finger across his tablet, and the main screen in front of her flickered to life. It displayed a corporate charter. A new one. I'm creating a new, semi-autonomous division within Croft Aeronautics, he stated. Materials science and advanced propulsion. It will have a singular, non-negotiable mandate to pursue radical, revolutionary science, unburdened by quarterly reports or shareholder anxieties. It will be funded directly and exclusively by me. It will have priority access to any resource within this company. It will answer to no one on the board. It will answer only to me. He set the tablet down. It showed a single empty box under the title, Division President. That's my offer, he said. I'm not offering you a job. I'm offering you a kingdom. Your first and only objective, build the Vance C-Tie alloy. Not from your father's notes, from your own mind. Make it better. Then use it to build an engine that makes the Axiom 9 look like a child's toy. I want you to take your father's ghost and turn it into the foundation of my company's future. It was an audacious, almost insane proposal, forged in the ashes of a multi-billion-dollar disaster. Eleanor looked from the blank charter to his face. She saw no pity in his eyes, no charity. She saw the cold, clear calculation of a predator who had just identified the most valuable asset in the room. He wasn't trying to save her. He was trying to acquire her. And for the first time in a decade, she felt a flicker not of fear, but of power. I have conditions, she said, her voice finding its strength. I would expect nothing less, Croft replied. First, the name. The division will be called the Vance Institute. Non-negotiable. Done. Second, my father's name must be attached to every patent, every discovery that derives from his foundational work. His legacy will be rebuilt, brick by public brick. Logical. Done. Third, she said, and now she turned to face him, her eyes holding his with an intensity that matched his own. Thorne's network, his shell corporations, his silent partners, the labs he paid for false certifications. He didn't build his house of cards alone. I want access to your corporate intelligence division, your forensic accountants, your lawyers. I don't just want him in a cage. I want to salt the earth of his entire empire. I want to pull his world down, root and stem, until not even the memory of his name remains in this industry. A slow, dangerous smile crept across Julian Croft's face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of recognition. He saw the same ruthless, unforgiving drive in her that fueled him. He was not acquiring a scientist. He was forging an alliance with a weapon. "Ms. Vance," he said, extending his hand, "your resources will be unlimited. Welcome to the board." Eleanor took his hand. The contact was firm, a contract sealed not on paper, but in shared purpose. The emptiness inside her began to recede, replaced by the cold, clear thrill of a new, far more complex equation waiting to be solved. The war against Marcus Thorne was over. The war for the future had just begun. 3 months later, the Vance Institute was a humming, vibrant reality on the 65th floor. The sterile white of the old skunk works had been replaced with transparent data walls and modular lab spaces. It was a place of controlled chaos, a reflection of its new president. Eleanor did not run her kingdom with the detached bureaucracy of a corporate executive. She ran it with the obsessive focus of a frontline general. Her team, hand-picked from the best and brightest within Croft Aeronautics, including a deeply humbled and eternally grateful Dr. Aris Thorne as her chief scientist, learned quickly that to work for Eleanor Vance was to submit to a baptism by fire. She demanded intellectual savagery. She challenged every assumption, tore apart every conclusion, and pushed them to the brink of their capabilities, and then a step beyond. She was a difficult, demanding, and often infuriating leader. But she was also brilliant, and she was always right. They followed her not out of fear, but out of a shared, intoxicating devotion to the purity of the work. Her partnership with Croft was an intricate, dangerous dance. They were not friends. They were co-conspirators. They would meet late at night in his penthouse, not to discuss progress, but to plot strategy. On a vast, holographic map of the world, they tracked the slow, systematic demolition of Thorne's empire. With Croft's financial weaponry and Eleanor's intimate knowledge of Thorne's methods, they were relentless. They triggered audits in Liechtenstein, exposed complicit labs in Germany, and initiated shareholder revolts in shell companies from Singapore to the Cayman Islands. They didn't just defeat their enemy, they erased him from the board. One night, Croft watched as Eleanor, with a few keystrokes, diverted the last of Thorne's hidden offshore assets into a blind trust dedicated to funding STEM scholarships for underprivileged students, a final, poetic act of justice. "You have a taste for blood, Eleanor," he observed, his voice holding a note of undisguised admiration. "I have a taste for order," she corrected him without looking up from the screen. He represented a chaotic variable. I am simply balancing the equation. But beneath the cold warrior, the ghost of the waitress still lingered. There were nights she would wake up in the small, Spartan apartment Croft had provided for her, her heart pounding with the phantom terror of being discovered, of being nobody again. The uniform was gone, but the camouflage was harder to shed. She trusted data, but she was still learning to trust people. She could command a room of brilliant minds, but she would eat her meals alone in her lab, more comfortable with the hum of a mass spectrometer than with idle conversation. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday at 3:17 a.m. It wasn't a dramatic explosion of discovery, but a quiet moment of clarity. Eleanor was staring at a molecular model of her father's alloy, wrestling with the same instability in the crystalline matrix that had plagued Thorn for 16 years. Her father's notes offered no solution. And then she stopped thinking like her father. She stopped trying to fix his formula and began to question its premise. Her father's work was based on smelting. He was a man of the forge, of heat and pressure. She was a woman of the digital age, of quantum modeling and atomic printers. With a sudden, electrifying insight, she realized she didn't need to smelt the alloy. She could build it, atom by atom. She spent the next 72 hours in a fugue state, coding a new fabrication protocol for their quantum material printers. She wasn't recreating her father's work. She was rendering it obsolete. When it was done, she initiated the print. Hours later, in the humming silence of the lab, a single, perfect turbine blade materialized in the fabrication chamber, built from the ground up. It was not Vance C-Tie. It was something new. Vance. V2. She summoned Croft. He arrived to find her holding the blade, her face streaked with exhaustion, but her eyes blazing with a light he had never seen before. "It's done," she said, her voice a near whisper. "The resonance signature is perfect. The crystalline structure is flawless. It's 40% stronger than my father's theoretical maximum." He took the blade from her. It felt impossibly light, yet radiated a sense of absolute integrity. He looked from the blade to the woman who had created it. He saw the exhaustion, the lingering shadows of her past. But he also saw the unshakable confidence of an architect who had just laid the cornerstone of a new age. "The Pentagon is pre-drafting the new contract," he said quietly. "They're calling the program Project Phoenix." Eleanor gave a small, weary smile. "A little on the nose, don't you think?" "Sometimes," Croft said, a genuine, unguarded warmth in his voice. "The truth doesn't require subtlety." He placed the blade carefully on a clean room pedestal, treating it like a holy relic. He then turned back to her, his expression serious. "Marcus Thorne's final appeal was denied this morning. He sent you a message." Eleanor tensed, the ghost of the past rising for a moment. "What did it say?" "One word," Croft replied. "Enjoy." She was silent for a long moment, staring at the blade, the perfect, beautiful fruit of her long war. Thorne's final curse, meant to remind her that her purpose was gone. But he was wrong. "My father spent his life searching for this," she said softly, gesturing to the blade. "He thought this was the answer. He was wrong, too." Croft raised an eyebrow. "What's the answer, then?" Eleanor turned her gaze from the finished product to the complex equations glowing on the data walls around them, the infinite web of problems yet to be solved. Her expression was not one of triumph, but of profound, boundless curiosity. The war was over, but the work, the real work, was just beginning. "The answer," Dr. Eleanor Vance said, a true, brilliant smile finally reaching her eyes, "is the next question."